This message comes from Allianz Travel Insurance. From visiting the in-laws in Indiana to sightseeing in Sicily, traveling can be stressful. An all-trips annual travel insurance plan can help you tackle every trip you take with confidence. Visit AllianzTravelInsurance.com.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. Can the shape of your skull or the look of your face say something deeper about you? Like if you're a good parent, or if you're smart, or if you're more likely to be a criminal? Well, the answer is no, absolutely not. But in the past, some scientists used the pseudosciences of phrenology, which studied the skull, and physiognomy, which studied the face, to try to prove that how you look says something about who you are on the inside. Again, it's junk science, totally fake. However, these junk sciences were used towards some pretty racist ends. Phrenologists used to rank people by race, from most to least evolved, just by using the shapes of their skulls.
So phrenology is a classic hit now in the pseudosciences.
That's Yale professor of philosophy, Lily Hu. She studies social science, race, and machine learning. She's here with me today, along with Rolling Stone culture writer Miles Klee.
How's it going?
Because something peculiar is happening. To my eye, there's been more interest lately in some of the ideas behind phrenology and physiognomy. From quote-unquote witch skulls and angel skulls, to the skull geometry of transvestigators, to the question of whether AI can detect gay faces, it seems like more and more people want to categorize each other with just a look at their heads. Here's my chat with Lily and Miles to understand the appeal and consequences of fake skull and face science coming back around in our culture. Even if it might not actually work, I am seeing a lot of that same idea that our skulls or our faces say something about who we are as people pop up in our culture anyway. Miles, where are you seeing that out in the wild?
Yeah, well, this got pretty big on TikTok over the last couple of years as just part of what I think of as the conspirituality pipeline. And that's just a catch-all term, I think, for woo-woo beliefs that lead you down a rabbit hole into, something that can be quite racist and harmful and reactionary. So, yeah, maybe it's fun to have your skull read, or in the same way that's fun to think about what your astrological sign means about your personality, right? Mm-hmm. On the surface, yeah, it's very fun, like on TikTok, like if you want to talk about an angel skull or a witch skull, and I couldn't even begin to define those things for you because I think people are just making those up as they go. But it can lead you down this path to basically eugenicist thought, and underneath there's kind of a really damaging old debunked ideology.
Yeah, talk to me about what some of these posts look like. I mean, you've mentioned the angel versus witch skulls, which already gives me pause. I mean, social connotations of who is angelic versus who's a witch, I could see those readings getting racist real quick. You had a great piece that you wrote for Rolling Stone where there's talk of like herbivore eyes. Please talk to me about what these posts look like and how people are engaging in them.
Yeah, you mentioned the herbivore eyes. This was something that I think really grew out of men who are spending too much time on the computer. They are basically saying that young actresses now, the really hot starlets now, all have eyes that are very wide set apart as opposed to closer together.
Right, like Halle Bailey or Anya Taylor-Joy, yeah.
And their analysis of that was that they have prey eyes, or they're more like a deer or something. And I don't really get what they're going for there. All this stuff really comes also out of incel culture. Guys who feel deprived of sex with women are so obsessed with the notion that your face or body shape is determining a lot of how you move through life. I mean, of course, to a certain extent, yes, the way we are perceived is a lot of, how we experience life, but they're talking about millimeters of chin slant or nose shape or, eye tilt,
right,
as making all the difference in the world and preventing them from finding, sexual fulfillment. So they have this really toxic way of looking at bodies and faces as completely deterministic of, what's going to happen to you in your life. Eventually it gets down to TikTok and maybe they're having more fun with it. It's like something that escaped containment.
Lily, what do you make of this impulse to categorize faces in this way?
We live in such a visual culture where we're examining faces all the time. And so in that sense, it's not a surprise that people are trying this out just simply because they've all become experts at the human face in the last 5 years. And so why not try to identify some correlations? You're spending all this time collecting all this data. You might as well come up with some new theory about faces and personality. I mean, of course, in the end, it's not actually that playful.
To get some background, when was phrenology popular and why?
Yeah, phrenology was most ascendant as a science in the 19th century, but it really grew in prominence because it seemed to provide answers to long-standing social questions. So questions like, who are the criminals in the society? Or in the American context, how are we going to incorporate the enslaved population or the free Black population or the Native American population into the broader society? In Europe, the questions have more to do with the degenerate type or the criminal type, and phrenology becomes a potential sort of answer to these social questions, figuring out how we're going to sort out these populations and handle them, whether those populations are those that are being colonized or even the enemy, as it were, from within.
Yeah, to that point about who's being colonized, I read that scholars believe that there's a pretty direct connection between Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act and phrenologists declaring Native Americans as not fit for civil life based on head shape. And it's interesting to consider how phrenology and physiognomy justified racism as an answer to these social questions. That said, how was phrenology disproved?
It turns out that you really have a difficult time finding out who is a criminal based on the shape of their skull or the look of their face. So physiognomy and phrenology is just not working from a working perspective. Like, it's not able to do the kinds of things that some people expected them to do.
Right. And the scientific consensus is that evidence doesn't support a genetic basis for race or for racial difference in terms of mental capacity either. But I began getting served phrenology content maybe a year and a half ago. I started getting these posts about Viking-like phenotypes, that language coming up a lot more. I mean, phenotype is something I hadn't really thought about since freshman year of high school when I took biology. And for those who need a refresher, phenotype just means how your genes are expressed and how you look. Like, for example, I have my dad's nose instead of my mom's nose, even though both are encoded in my genes. But I've seen these kinds of return type posts about needing more Viking-like phenotypes. It just seems like they kind of want more strapping white people. I don't know. Have you seen that kind of stuff as well?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not particularly subtle, right? It's no different than Nazi propaganda of the day that would elevate, a kind of blonde, blue-eyed person. And, we talked about phrenology being, repeatedly debunked. I think it's interesting they use the word phenotype, which is an actual biological concept that makes sense.
Right.
My phenotype is that I do have blue eyes. I think they use this term because it is an established biological concept, and so it seems somehow more objective or more scientific, even though they're just using it in a pretty transparently racist way to say buff white guys are where it's at, and that's all we should be focused on, producing as a species.
Coming up, why phrenology is linked to fate and who that hurts.
There's this disciplining, right, which says you can't construct your fate. That's all biologically determined. And, it's their job to police that and to enforce it as social reality.
Stick around.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. If you're tired of spending hundreds on big wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks, Mint Mobile might be right for you with plans starting from $15 a month. Shop plans today at mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
This message comes from Capital One. With the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One, you earn unlimited 2% cash back on every purchase and get big purchasing power so your business can spend more and earn more. Stephen, Brandon, and Bruno, the business owners of SandCloud, reinvested their 2% cash back to help build the company's retail presence. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus. Terms apply.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from Amazon. Have you ever gotten sick on a very expensive, very non-refundable family trip? Amazon One Medical has 24/7 virtual care, so you can get help no matter where you are. And with Amazon Pharmacy, your meds can get delivered right to your hotel fast. It's kind of like the room service of medical care. Thanks to Amazon, healthcare just got less painful.
I also want to zoom out and mention something you said the other day in your pre-interview. There continues to be racial injustice. So long as that's the case, there will always be a population of people, including scientists, who are trying to answer why by saying maybe there's something different about these people. Maybe that explains the disparities. Maybe not because we haven't invested into welfare or ongoing sources of deprivation. Maybe because these populations are not fit for modern life. I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, I think that the reason for that is because there continues to be real material problems out in the world that motivate this science, in quotes. Like, we need to figure out problems in the world, right? And scientists are trying to pick up those questions. For example, what explains the fact that our prisons are full of Black people? Someone might try to use their skills as a geneticist to try to answer this question. And there's always going to be an audience for that kind of an answer because it serves particular political interests. And as long as that continues to be the case, as long as it continues to be the case that we live in a society riven with inequality, there's always going to be a contingent of people who say that the answer is in biology. The answer is not in society. The answer is not in politics. It's literally just in the bodies of these peoples themselves.
What Lily's saying, Miles, makes me think of something that you brought up in your writing in terms of gender policing. Miles, when you wrote about this, you also discussed the rise of transvestigation. For people who don't know, transvestigators are people that take pictures of celebrities or politicians and try to look at their bodies and, yes, skulls to prove that they are trans. As an example, Candace Owens recently has gotten a lot of attention, I think, for her podcast and YouTube channel for quote unquote transvestigating Brigitte Macron, the wife of the president of France. Miles, in your article about this, you showed a screenshot of people using skull geometry to try to prove that J. Robert Oppenheimer is trans. How does the rise of phrenology tie into biological essentialism and transphobia?
Yeah, this is such a demented subculture. There are people on these transvestigation pages on Facebook and other social platforms who are essentially convinced that every single celebrity is trans. I think this has a lot to do with trying to justify the kind of political campaign to demonize and dehumanize trans people, because we're talking, realistically about a very small portion of the public, a very small percentage of, Americans at all. Mm-hmm. And yet it's got the focus of the White House and Congress, and the political effort to eliminate these people's rights has to be justified by a sort of paranoia that there are way more trans people than you think. And so I think transvestigation and attempts to diagram people's bodies and faces, it's all part of the same kind of invasiveness that, informs stuff like these bathroom bills. And it's also an attempt to scare people into thinking that trans quote unquote ideology has actually already surrounded you and it needs to be beaten back in some way.
The core of transvestigation seems to be the idea that biology is destiny And people can tell who you really are just by examining your face and your skull. If they do enough shots of your face at different angles, they'll find out some truth about you. So I think at its core, there's this disciplining, right? Which says you can't construct your identity, you can't construct your fate. That's all biologically determined. And, it's their job to police that and to enforce it as social reality.
Right, but the idea that you can tell who is trans by their skull or face is kind of iffy. Again, they're transvestigating people like Oppenheimer. I saw a post where people transvestigated Shrek even. But also this idea of biological inevitability that's kind of undergirding this whole thing also feels very connected to the basically eugenicist idea that some people simply aren't fit to be integrated into society. That idea of biological destiny, it seems like it can be used as a tool to limit people in so many different ways. And, unfortunately, we're also seeing some belief in this within the sciences. Lily, you mentioned that Stanford researchers published a study that appeared to show that AI could detect gay faces. I think others have questioned those results, but regardless, I think greater focus on, face detection and surveillance just in general might be pushing some of this stuff to the fore. Can you say more about that and its connection to phrenology and physiognomy?
That's just what the OG physiognomy people were doing in the 19th century. So Francis Galton, he's the father of eugenics. He was a huge physiognomy guy. He was so interested in what the camera could tell about people that he actually invented this photographing technique to be able to identify the criminal, where he would do these composite photographs of different individuals, basically by overlaying photos of criminals on top of each other. He thought that that would bring out what the criminal attributes are, what the head of a criminal looks like or what the criminal nose looks like. And, it all sounds ridiculous, but of course, fast forward to the 21st century, we're not doing that much more of a sophisticated version of it, where instead of a composite photograph, we're running those photos through some sort of complicated machine learning system. And that's just going to draw out these telltale features of that type of person. So whether that's a criminal type or a gay type. So it's really just this direct through line from the 19th century to the 21st century.
It's so wild to me. I'm kind of concerned about why we would need computers or even more casual TikTok phrenology or physiognomy to tell us about people's qualities that they can't just tell us themselves. But I wonder, what are the possible consequences of this resurgence in phrenology and physiognomy?
Well, first, I think that there's just a kind of normalization of race thinking, a normalization of eugenicist thinking. And just as in previous iterations of the thought, people are trying to localize the source of a societal problem to a particular segment of the population that is thought to be irrecoverably backwards or defective, and on that basis, deny them basic rights or deny them a part in our society as they are seen to pose an existential threat. What we get here are these stoking fears of a trans conspiracy, and that becomes the real fuel for a national project.
I'm thinking of what the Trump administration is currently doing in terms of scooping up brown men and shipping them off to El Salvador, because what we're seeing about these guys is that they're, maybe they have a Real Madrid tattoo. It's a soccer tattoo that ICE has determined is a gang tattoo. We can tell by looking at you objectively that you are in a gang. There's no kind of due process needed. We've visually processed you and determined that you're a gang member. I think that is a very clear-cut extension of the kind of thing we've been talking about today.
Well, Lily, Miles, I really appreciate you all coming on the show today and educating me on all the nuances of our modern-day phrenology. I really appreciate it. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
That was Yale philosophy professor Lily Hu and Rolling Stone culture writer Miles Klee. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a minute and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Homes.com. The right agent can make or break your home search. That's why Homes.com provides an agent directory that details each agent's experience, so you can find the right one and ultimately the right home. Homes.com. We've done your homework. This message comes from Warby Parker. What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost, like free adjustments for life. Find your pair at warbyparker.com or visit one of their hundreds of stores around the country.